want to welcome everyone to another episode of Race, Culture, in the Church. Race, Culture, in the Church. I think we're coming up on our 20th podcast now on this subject. Today, I am pleased, I am happy to welcome in a new son, as I like to call all my men that have come into the sphere of City Church a son, Ryan Gorgol. He is walking with us faithfully at City Church. He also heads up our AV, so he could be on the other side of this camera and mic. But today he's on the side he is on. So welcome, Ryan.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to be on this side, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's a different slice for me.
Less responsibility and mic checking and all that good stuff.
Yeah, except now that my words are being recorded. Accountability, which I think will end up probably being a theme of today's conversation. Would be my guess.
Very
actually.
Good. I like that.
But yeah, quick little story about me.
Please, go right
especially
ahead.
For people at City Church who haven't met me yet. I'm married. My wife's name is Jamie. We live out in Fair Oaks. We just moved to Sacramento area. Well, let's see. It would have been April of 2020. That's when we arrived. My wife and I, in 2019, decided that May of 2020 was going to be the time that we'd move from Chicago to Sacramento. And what a heck of a time we picked.
And why Sacramento?
Mostly for family. Okay. I mean, I think the shortest way I could put it is there's a couple of people that I just absolutely need to be living close to. Distance wasn't working. So, and that's all my family network. It would have been probably about a 5-year plan between my wife and I, more or less, to be like, at some point we will leave Chicago, where I'm from. It's my hometown. We will leave Chicago and we will go to Sacramento. And then when that exactly fell in terms of timing happened to be right when, COVID was fresh and none of us really knew what was happening, I know Chicago had just gone into basically lockdowns about 2 weeks before we moved. So it was like real fresh. It did make moving easier, I have to say. There's no one on the roads, gas prices were cheaper, but in every other way, it made life way more difficult. And kind of in my life leading up to that moment, my wife and I met at university, and we were in Nashville at Belmont University. That's where I went to school, got my higher education, of course, but really started to learn a lot more about the world and be exposed to more diverse experiences, of course. And growing up in Chicago, my childhood, I was raised in the church. I was raised in that community, hopped around every Methodist you could think of, probably. I've never been terribly particular with any specific vein. But I would say up until college, my spiritual life, youth group was capture the flag, food, games, boys playing games for the most part, and studying the Word. When I went to college, that was the first time where I was really in charge of finding my own faith community for myself, that had always been kind of orchestrated more or less by my parents to some degree before. And so then in college, I really kind of opened a whole new world of like, well, here's all these different churches I can go to. And being in Nashville and being in the music industry at the time, there was 100 churches in 2 blocks. It's massive. Having said that, I ended up going to a church that was the antithesis in a lot of ways to what a Nashville church might be. The worship music was not a performance. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a extravaganza. In fact, most of the time you could not see the singers or any of the performers because they were seated, everyone else stood. And that was something that really captivated me, was that it wasn't too much I'd seen in my, even up until this point, I was like, 20 years old? Too much I'd seen that Sunday mornings or whatever service you end up going to, it's welcome to the theater, here's your ticket, come sit at a seat, please be quiet. We might ask you to leave if you have a kid and is crying. That was kind of the vibe, which I don't think it's inherently wrong. I don't think it's that's terrible, but I wasn't looking for a show. I was looking for spiritual development, and I don't think the pantomime was helping my spiritual development at the time.
And you were 20?
Yeah, I would say 20 when I started going to the Village Chapel in Nashville. And then after college, stayed in Nashville for a while, was working in the music industry there, assisting under producers, things like that. Strangely, I never worked in country music, though. Did everything but country. It's kind of weird how it worked out that way, but so it is. And then I ended up moving to Chicago, which was supposed to be for a project, and then I just never left. So I went to produce an album for an artist, some friends of mine, and then by the time we were done recording, I already picked up 2 more clients, and I was like, I like Chicago way more than the South, so I'm going to just stay here for now. And then my wife and I got married. The plans that we discussed earlier kind of came about, and knew that Sacramento was kind of my landing point at some point. My wife and I started going to this community in Logan Square in Chicago, and that was our church home, church family. Still is in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And that was that community was, it was the first time I worshiped I was in a room even, I can say, where even if being white, I was the majority, it was a thin margin. It was 51%. It wasn't 99% like every other church I'd ever been to. Mm-hmm. And that was a really important time in my life to discover mostly who I am, what I hold in my heart that I didn't typically don't give voice to, but lives in there already. I think that's the time I really discovered I have a lot of racist tendencies. This is things that are below observable. I think you've spent enough time with me that you probably wouldn't be like, oh, that Ryan guy, he's a real jerk. It wasn't like that. It was just.
I just keep it to myself.
I appreciate it.
It's interesting you say that. So you would definitely not fall into you would not agree with folks that, the John Grudens of the world. I don't have a racist bone in my body.
I think to be human is to have a racist tendency. It's hard for me to, let me put it this way, I have a wide curiosity base. Almost everything interests me, so I tend to explore and study things. I was telling you earlier that I realized I was a miniature version of my dad when in college I started reading a history book for fun. That's the kind of way I tend to think. And to see human biology and how it functions, and to get just some baseline knowledge, high school level biology, you can start to interpret there would be a reason for humans to not trust people that don't look like them. Now, we're not going to go into all that, but I think it is a facet of being a human is that we just don't trust others. I think it's a very core thing, unfortunately. And so to overcome that and to learn to trust others, and to fight against all the conditioning that, at least for me, that I grew up with about how to treat people of different races, it takes a lot of energy and intentionality.
Would you say trust and curiosity are in the same swim lane?
Yeah, yeah.
I may not trust. I'm apprehensive. I'm less trusting of someone. But am I curious? I think part of my question is, particularly to your generation and to your life experience, do you want to know about others that don't look like you or have your life experience? Do you want to know? I don't know.
That's a great question, because I think I would say it's probably situational. I think everyone's always had the time where you get home after a terrible day at work. Let's say it's Friday afternoon. The whole work week was just rough. And you're going to get home and just have no energy, and you might not have curiosity about anything, your dog, your wife, whatever. So I think yes or no is going to be hard to say on that question. But I think our generation really still wants to know, trust, and be curious about other people. But we also have grown up in a time that might be the most untrustworthy. At least our experiences growing up have been. I'm a millennial, so you could say that one of the ways to define a millennial is you remember where you were on 9/11, right? And then you remember the 2008 financial collapse. So there's kind of 2 markers that the millennials in general can look back on and say those are 2 definitive moments when you learned you can't trust people. You can't trust institutions. Is that across the whole board? I don't know. But from my perspective, I can see it that way.
That's interesting. It shows my boomer ignorance is that I thought millennials were more distrusting of organization, but trusting or it's almost anything goes on a personal level. Come as you are. Just come. You know.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. I mean, to an extent, yeah, I would agree that maybe more so than other generations, a little bit more open and willing to explore paths that might not seem obvious.
Now you bring a perspective that particularly a lot of folks on the West Coast don't have. You've lived in the Midwest. You've lived in the South.
Texas,
and
the
now,
East Coast, Nashville, and now
so
Sacramento.
now you're here. Take me through that geographical lens that folks, and again, yes, we're generalizing, and it's one person's opinion, but your opinion is going to be more rounded and well-versed than mine, because I haven't lived in Chicago.
Yeah.
I haven't lived in Nashville. I haven't lived in Texas. I've been to all of them, but have not lived, planted, spent considerable time there. So how, given the subjects we've already been talking about, how would Nashville, how would Chicago, how would Texas look at and answer those questions that we were just talking about?
That's such a good point, because I think those communities, I mean, so like to give you the really quick list, I was born in Naperville, Illinois, suburb of Chicago. Lived there till I was 7, moved to Boston area for 2 years.
See, now you got the East Coast too.
Yep,
so
East Coast. Then I moved back to Naperville until I was 16. And then when I was 16, we moved to Houston. When I was 18, I graduated, went to college in Nashville. And then Nashville back to Chicago, and bumming around Europe a little bit in there too, but never lived there. I think every community has its own daily struggles and problems, and that is what more often gets reflected in the rest of their life. So let's put it, let's see. So like Chicago, I mean, you could talk about a million problems that are going on in Chicago. Most people bring up gun violence, which makes a lot of sense. They have a lot of gun deaths. It's a very, very complicated subject, and you really, to understand it, you have to get into race culture. You have to understand what's going on politically in Chicago that has made this situation where it is. So that's how you'd kind of attack that problem. Move down to Houston, Texas, and it's a totally different world, you know. But again, me being me, like if I dug into Texas history and understood the difficulty that everyone around me, their parents' generations had to go through to live there, or probably 2 generations really. Then it's like, oh, now I understand like why you want to carry guns on the back of your truck and why you think these certain rights are inalienable and these aren't. Same thing. Nashville's different. It's a transplant city. I didn't know anyone from Nashville. Never met anyone there who was from there, you know. And so that was more of and that was in the music industry. So it was, you know, a bunch of left-leaning-ish people who don't have serious convictions but know how to parrot the line, if that makes sense to say trendy.
A lot of sense, yeah.
And then, I mean, I don't know anything about Sacramento really yet. Since I've lived here during the pandemic, it's not like I can meet. It's a little bit harder to meet people right now, you know. So I think the way different cultures, communities approach the problems, whatever those problems may be, it's going to be so directly reflected by what's going on in their life, just around them. What's the weather today, you know? Was there another crash on Highway 50? You know, like those sort of things. I think those little things add up on an individual level, and then when that individual goes to a communal level, it's all compound, essentially. And out of that is where you have discussions about what is life? What are we doing here? You know, why do we actually meet on Sunday mornings? You know, those sort of things.
Apart from the church, quote unquote, and we won't go down that rabbit hole, does your generation ask the meaning of life, or do they just live? Yes, you're speaking for all millennials now.
Yeah, well, since I am the captain of the millennials here. Yeah, I think absolutely maybe more I don't know if open-mindedness is even really truly what's happening. I think there's an homage to being open. And I think our generation wants to be open to new experiences. I mean, what do you mean exactly?
I don't know. I mean, just again, I almost reflected back. What do you mean when it comes to life? Not Ryan Gorgol.
Sure.
Ryan Gorgol, the faithful follower of Jesus Christ, but Ryan Gorgol, millennial, that has been from Chicago to Houston to Nashville to Boston to Chicago. Do you just live, or do you see yourself on a path?
A path, 100%. Often I don't know where my next foot's going to fall on that path, which is uncomfortable. I think that's the benefit of moving a lot, though, is you realize that you're not in control anyways. Like, you should give up on that illusion, just keep walking. And then the difficult part is staying diligent in the faith and listening to the Spirit to know if you should be leaning left or leaning right in that moment. Where should you be walking? I think, it's a journey in that sense.
But how about your unbelieving friends?
Oh, it's more wayward. Yeah, it's...
Do they see themselves on a path? Do they see... I guess where I'm going with all of this discussion right now is that if this is a game of survivor, then that's the objective. Just survive.
Yeah.
Absent a meaningful, I tell I'm not a fan or probably ever watched Survivor. I just know enough of it to be dangerous. A meaningful purpose beyond just surviving. Just surviving. I think for the last 18 months, going on 2 years, I think that's what folks have been doing, playing the game of survivor.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking for my generation, since I'm apparently, anyways.
You're the captain of millennials. I'm gonna get you a T-shirt, captain of millennials.
All my friends who are not believers, they definitely they're on a path. They have a purpose, I think. The depth of that purpose is going to vary, I think. If someone has a creed attached to that purpose, that's actually it's not too unique, I would say, There are a lot of people, now it depends on what you accept as a creed. I mean, some people's creed is just like, get as much stuff and live as fast as possible and die. Now, I know that creed is, it's not going to work for me. I think it's a pretty bad way to live life, humbly speaking. But some of those people I've talked to who that's been their creed, when I learn about their life, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense how you'd think this way, now that I know a little bit more about you. For me, I mean, the path is I always remember when Jesus was asked, what are you doing with these sinners? And he said, well, the doctor doesn't come here for the healthy people, So not to say that my pursuit has been well, I'm the doctor, I know how to fix everything, but I feel like I do have I have access to the doctor, right? And I can share that with people. So I've always loved being in community with people who are not believers in Christ. Now, it's a balance, of course. If it's too heavy on one side, I think it can skew pretty bad in my life too. And I think everyone in our generation, they have purpose. There's a poise to them. Whether they can tie it down to an idea that's rock solid, that's where I think maybe no, probably not.
Under the heading of race, culture, and the church, what keeps you, I won't say awake at night, but what are the things you're pondering right now? Broadly speaking, what are the intractable issues that you would hope or would want to see addressed?
Yeah. Well, the United States is a really interesting place, right?
That's an understatement.
It's
That's an understatement.
it is. It's amazing. My views on the United States can be summed up in the words of Winston Churchill, which makes me very un-American to quote a Brit, but he said that America will always do the right thing after exhausting every other option, which I think is kind of the way Americans go about life. Like, we will do everything, we'll try 99 ways to not use the cure, and then finally submit, like, okay, those 99 ways didn't work, let's try the 100th thing, which is the cure, you know? And I think you can see that as an echo. Like, it's just constant through American history. This country was founded economically, dependent on slave labor. Now, it wasn't the only place in the world, but it was certainly prevalent here. I mean, we don't need to go into numbers, obviously, but we all know hundreds of thousands of enslaved people. Upon formation of this country, which legally said that an individual is an individual and has inalienable rights, those people were still held in bondage. So you start your legal foundation on split soil, right? You're standing on two different, one foot's in the marsh, one foot's on the rock. That's always going to be tumultuous as long as that rupture exists. And it's perpetually existed. I mean, no matter what happens, no matter how far the pendulum swings this way, it ends up coming back this way too, you know? I mean, you can see this repeatedly. Okay, suffrage for all men, basically? Great. Well, now here's the here's the Jim Crow era. Okay. Oh, you actually want to own property that's federally, subsidized? Well, now it's the 1950s America. We're going to redline your neighborhoods. You name it, the list just keeps going on and on and on. There's these constant fissures. And what boggles my mind is that the Christian church is the only place I can see that has the power to say, like, we are one people. We are, we're a holy priesthood. Let's figure that out. Hasn't happened, though.
Well, as we've shared previously in other podcasts, and now, as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, the most segregated time in America is Sunday mornings. Again, I like to say our generation is passing on to you a spiritual dumpster fire.
Well, out of the fire, out of the ashes, right?
I love your optimism. So what phoenix is going to rise?
So now I'm predicting out of the millennials. I think that large church organizations that have been entrenched for a long time, and I'm not against those organizations, I think they'll either lose relevancy and crumble slowly and kind of suddenly. I'm not going to bring up current examples because we don't need to get that political. But I also think there will be church communities and larger bodies of organized churches that will find ways to actually connect with the new world. I mean, I know this sounds obvious, but we live in a totally different world and none of us understand, right?
Totally different from 2020, totally different from
I would say
2000, totally different from...
let's go to 1985.
Okay.
I mean, I think one thing we're still dealing with is the internet. It's such a new idea. But if you look, and me being me, go to world history, like what happened within, I think it was 50 years of the Gutenberg Bible being printed. Martin Luther's tacking up his 95 Theses. The Catholic Church is crumbling. Well, it's not crumbling, but there's a major fissure.
Radically changed.
And it's all because the dissemination of information went from incredibly expensive, you had to have a monk in a manuscript copying out line for line, to a printing press. So all of a sudden information became cheaper. It was still incredibly expensive, but relatively cheaper. And it rocked the world. It split Europe. It changed political ideologies. There were revolutions. I mean, the list goes on. The internet's still young, So we still just don't know what we're doing, I think. And I think it's the great time of innovation to figure out what do we do with this new ability to communicate, and how do we use this ability to communicate to actually bring people together.
What, you mean cat videos isn't the purpose of the internet? Or what?
Well, it is once advertising was the purpose of the internet.
I've likened the internet and things of that vein as a very sharp knife. In the right hands, it's a great utility. In the wrong hands, you can sever an artery and bleed out. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure where we're at with that, and that's again, we the boomers, we're handing you the keys to the building. Mm. I mean, literally and figuratively, the keys to the building are being passed on. It's, again, personal testimony. My prayer, I had the audacity to be in worship in a situation where I guess praise was going on. There was a lot of activity. And I just said audibly, I said, God, I hope this is good for you. Because it sure stinks for me right now. Mm-hmm. It's just not working. It's just not. And I'm in a position of authority, and people would be looking to me for answers and leadership. And I said, if I ever get into a position where I could do better or different, I would. And that was my promise to God. Mm. Now, we, City Church of Sacramento, we will be celebrating 10 years in February. And as my mentor, Dr. Campbell, has said, I don't think I've ever seen quite a ministry like City Church of Sacramento. So we're doing different. Mm-hmm. Time will tell how effective we are. Mm. Part of that measure of effectiveness is as we pass off the keys to the building, to the car, to whatever metaphor you want to use. Mm-hmm. What condition if it's a car, is it gassed? Is the oil been changed? Is it sufficient to get you to where we need to go? Do you feel? Yeah.
The church, the Big C church. I would say yes and yeah, absolutely. I think
you were going to say yes and no.
Well, I think my no is going to be kind of like forest fires are necessary because they clear out and prepare area for growth. I mean, I think sometimes you need a fire. Or to borrow like a pure business, analogy. Like if your company's not hacking it and you're not making money, then you're going to go out of business. And if we believe the free hand, then that's a good thing. Like that's what should be happening, right? Because then it allows someone else to come into that space and do something different with it. I think that's where I think the church needs to be focused, is not how do we hold our current institution in perpetuity. It's more just to think, like, what is our institution even supposed to do? I mean, like, let's go back to Acts and say, well, are we actually living like that church lived? I've never been a part of a church that really, truly does, because I think that's so radical. I don't think Americans could live that way. There's an exception to that, but it's irrelevant. But I think it's going back to the fundamental idea. Like, let's not worry too much about the institution of the church. It's okay if the church crumbled. I think that would be fine. I really do. I think Jesus would be okay, and I think he could still get as much from his children, whether or not there's a building around him or not. I don't think that matters. Having said that, we have this inheritance. We should use it. Let's not just take the keys and throw it out the window and be like, no, I'm just going to bike everywhere. It's like, no, we have this. Let's try and use it for something. But that's going to be really uncomfortable for a lot of people because it means change fundamentally. And the hardest part of change is you never really know what's going to happen when you change something. Just going to have to find out usually.
Well, Ryan Gorgol, I can talk to you for, I think, at least 3 hours, and our time is ended. I do have one last question. It's very important. What's the last song you listened to on your phone?
I was listening to it before I walked in. Probably don't want to know.
Oh, I want to know.
It's from well, it's obscure. So it's from a playlist on Spotify called Nordic Noir. It's like Scandinavian soundscapes, basically. So the last song technically was Your Shadow Tells a Story of What We Could Have Been, which is incredibly prescient given what we just talked about.
Thank you so much. See, I knew there's. Thank you, Ryan, so much. I appreciate you. Appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.